There are objects in this world that should never be touched, never opened, and above all, never owned. They may appear harmless, a painting, a wooden box, a porcelain doll, or an old chair left to gather dust. But behind their silence lies something darker, a presence, a curse, a weight that has driven people to madness, misfortune, and even death. Some of these cursed relics have passed through countless hands, and with each new owner comes a new tragedy. Accidents without explanation, sudden illnesses, unrelenting nightmares, or a growing sense of dread that refuses to leave. Skeptics call it coincidence. Others call it evil made physical. In today's video, we'll unlock the secrets of 5 cursed objects that have terrified historians, collectors, and entire communities. From a haunted box said to imprison a demon, to a painting so disturbing that it's been linked to house fires and suicides. These are not stories drawn from horror movies. These are cases with real names, real records, and real consequences. We won't tell you what to believe, but we'll show you what happened. So dim the lights, steady your nerves, and whatever you do, don't look away. Because once you hear the names of these cursed objects, they tend to stay with you.
It looks ordinary-aged wood, a brass handle, the faint scent of something long forgotten. To the untrained eye, it's just an old wine cabinet. But to those who have come into contact with it, the Dybbuk Box is something else entirely. Behind its simple frame lies a string of tragedies, whispers in the dark, and a presence that refuses to be ignored. Stories have circulated for decades, each more disturbing than the last. People who touched it reported illness, nightmares, visions of a hateful old woman, and a suffocating dread that never let go. Some called it cursed, others called it possessed, but all agreed on one thing. The box should never have been opened. The story truly begins in 2001, in the quiet corners of Portland, Oregon, where an antique dealer named Kevin Mannis stumbled upon the cabinet at an estate sale. The seller was the granddaughter of a 103-year-old Holocaust survivor, recently deceased. Among dusty heirlooms and faded trinkets, the box sat in eerie silence, its wood darkened with age, its door tightly sealed. When Mannis asked about it, the granddaughter hesitated. Her grandmother had called it a Dybbuk Box vessel, used in Jewish folklore to trap malevolent spirits. It had always been locked, always hidden, and she warned, perhaps half-jokingly, that it should never be opened. But Mannis, curious and unconvinced by superstition, bought the piece and took it back to his shop. He believed it would make a charming restoration project, a conversation starter. What he didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the moment he brought that box into his space, something else entered with it. And whatever that something was, it would not remain silent for long. The disturbances began almost immediately. On the very first night, Mannis heard strange noises in his workshop, soft rustling sounds, whispers without a source, and footsteps pacing behind closed doors. Lights flickered, bulbs burst, and the air grew dense with the pungent scent of jasmine mixed with something rotting, something wrong. Thinking it was coincidence, he pressed on. But things escalated. Every person who came near the box, friends, customers, even family, complained of intense fatigue, unexplainable anxiety, or vivid, paralyzing nightmares. Hoping to rid himself of whatever was plaguing his life, Mannis gifted the box to his mother for her birthday. Moments after opening it, she collapsed from a sudden stroke. She survived, but never spoke again. The box changed hands several times after that, each time followed by a familiar pattern. The scent returned, electronics malfunctioned, glass shattered, and dreams became battlegrounds of shadow and despair. One owner claimed they woke each night at precisely 3:33 a.m. to the sound of something dragging itself across the floor. Another reported waking to find a dark figure at the foot of their bed, watching unmoving, until morning. Health issues multiplied, pets fled, relationships collapsed. The box never shouted, it never moved, but its presence deepened, quiet, patient, relentless. The cabinet itself is unassuming, crafted from dark acacia wood, barely the size of a small toolbox. It stands on short feet, with a pair of hinged doors in front and a single drawer beneath. Inside are odd, almost ritualistic items. 2 locks of hair tied with cord, a small granite slab etched with Hebrew, a dried rosebud, a goblet, a candle holder, and a golden wine cupich object, placed deliberately, as if to seal something in. None of these items bear value on their own, but together, within the box, they feel curated like pieces of a forgotten rite. What sets the Dybbuk Box apart isn't just the folklore attached to it, but how closely it adheres to the shape of that folklore. In Jewish mysticism, a Dybbuk is a dislocated soul, often malevolent, seeking a host. Sometimes it latches onto a living body. Other times, it is trap-bound inside a container by ancient rites meant to protect the living. This box, with its odd interior and unnerving effects, fits that mold too well to be coincidence. People who have examined it in person often describe a sensation of being watched, or worse, weighed down as if something behind the wood is aware of them. And though the items inside have been catalogued, no one can say for certain why they were chosen, or what they're meant to hold back. Many theories have emerged over the years, but none bring certainty. Some skeptics argue the Dybbuk Box is nothing more than an elaborate hoax born from internet forums and fueled by suggestible minds. They claim Kevin Mannis fabricated the legend as a viral experiment in fear. And yet, those who've handled the box firsthand often refuse to speak publicly. A few reportedly left their jobs, moved homes, or sought therapy after encounters they cannot rationalize. If it was a hoax, they ask, why does it continue to destroy lives in silence? Folklorists point to the precision of the box's components, each aligning with ancient Jewish exorcism rituals, particularly those used to bind wayward spirits. Paranormal investigators have attempted to measure energy near it, often reporting inexplicable electromagnetic surges. Some even believe that trauma suckers that suffered by its original owner, a Holocaust survivor, may have imprinted something far more personal onto the box. Not a demon, but grief weaponized into a haunting. Today, the Dybbuk Box sits locked behind glass in a private collection, untouched, unopened. Those who approach it often do so with glove sand, never alone. It does not cry out, it does not shake or rattle, and yet no one dares to destroy it. So the question remains, is the Dybbuk Box truly cursed, or is it a mirror reflecting the fear we carry within ourselves? Whatever the truth may be, there is one rule that everyone who has encountered it seems to agree on: never open the box. They say art reflects emotion, but what if a painting didn't just capture anguish, but radiated it? The Anguished Man is not a masterpiece in the traditional sense. It's crude, distorted, and disturbing. A man, faceless and screaming, trapped in a canvas of red and black. No one knows who painted it. No signature, no origin. Just a rumor passed between hands. The artist mixed his own blood into the paint, and shortly after finishing the piece, he took his own life. Since then, the painting has surfaced only a few times, and each time, the effects on its owners have been chilling. Doors slam on their own. Whispers fill silent rooms. Figures flicker past the edges of vision. And at night, some swear they hear crying glow, human and unbearably sad. It's a work of art that no museum will hang. A portrait that no collector keeps for long. And those who've dared to live with it often come to regret it. The painting's most documented chapter began in northern England, in the home of Sean Robinson, who inherited it from his grandmother in the early 2000s. According to family lore, She had kept the painting locked away in her attic for over 25 years, convinced that it was evil. She claimed it whispered to her in the night, and that its presence coincided with a deep depression that had shadowed her final years. Robinson, skeptical but curious, brought the painting into his own home, hoping to uncover the truth behind his grandmother's fear. The home itself was ordinary, quiet, suburban streets, brick walls, warm lighting. But the moment the painting entered, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, colder. Robinson's wife began waking at 3 a.m., convinced someone was watching her. Their son complained of voices in the hallway, and objects started falling without cause. Lights flickered, doors opened and closed on their own. Even the family dog refused to enter the room where the painting hung. It was during this period that Robinson began filming the painting, setting up cameras overnight. What he captured was subtle unexplained bangs, faint moaning, and movement in rooms that should have been still. But over time, the disturbances grew louder, and one question lingered in the shadows. Had something been invited in, or had it always been there, waiting? Once the painting was unboxed and placed on the wall, it became more than just a disturbing image. It became a presence. Within days, the Robinson household began to unravel. Soft crying echoed through the house at night, impossible to locate. Doors slammed without wind, and heavy footsteps creaked down the upstairs hallway even when everyone was downstairs. The temperature in the room where the painting hung dropped inexplicably, and no amount of heating seemed to make a difference. Sean Robinson began documenting these phenomena. In one recording, a door swings violently shut while no one is near. In another, faint, sob-slow, human, and hollow can be heard in the background. On more than one occasion, family members woke to the feeling of pressure on their chest, as if someone was standing over them, pressing them into the bed. The most unnerving event came when Robinson's wife found herself frozen in place, unable to move or scream, as the painting seemed to hum in the corner of the room. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises coming from the house, chanting, wailing, metallic bang-sat hours, when the family claimed to be asleep. Guests refused to return after visiting once, and the longer the painting stayed, the more it seemed to feed off something: attention, fear, or perhaps simply the act of being seen. But still, no one could explain why. The painting itself is crude, almost primitive in technique, yet disturbingly evocative. It depicts a figure of a man, faceless and distorted, mouth stretched wide in an eternal scream of agony. The background bleeds in violent shades of red, orange, and rusted black, as if the canvas itself is trying to burn. The brushstrokes are aggressive, slashed, and uneven, and when viewed up close, they seem to ripple ever so slightly, as if the emotion behind them is never fully settled. There is no artist's signature, no date, no known origin. But according to Robinson's grandmother, and passed down family rumor, the painter mixed his own blood into the oils used to create the piece. He suffered from deep psychological torment, and after completing the painting, he took his own life. Some believe that traumath, raw human suffering, fused into the pigment left behind a psychic residue, a kind of haunting that isn't bound to a ghost, but to emotion itself. The painting has never been officially appraised. No gallery has agreed to take it. Those who've seen it in person report feelings of nausea, unease, or even faint dizziness. Some say the figure's scream echoes long after they've turned away. Others claim its eyes, though featureless, follow them. To this day, no one knows why the painting affects people the way it does. But those who've lived with it say it's not the image that's dangerous, it's the silence beneath it. Over the years, countless theories have emerged, none offering peace of mind. Some researchers suggest that the painting is a psychological Trigera visual trap that unsettles the subconscious, particularly those sensitive to expressions of trauma. They point to the disturbing color palette, the aggressive lines, and the faceless subject as design elements meant to evoke discomfort. In this view, the painting itself isn't haunted. but its composition activates something ancient in the human brain. The recognition of suffering. Others believe the story of the artist, the blood in the paint, the suicides more than just lore. They propose that if emotion can be embedded in music, in writing, then perhaps extreme emotional energy, grief, despair, Rajakan, imprint itself into pigment. The anguished man, then, becomes less of a painting and more of a vessel. Not for a ghost, but for the painter's final moment, forever screaming, never released. Paranormal investigators who've studied the painting in person have recorded unusual EMF readings and temperature drops, but no clear signs of traditional haunting. No specter appears. No name has been whispered. And yet, everyone who's lived with the painting reports the same thing. A growing sense of unease, as if the painting is watching, waiting. To this day, the painting remains in Sean Robinson's possession, though rarely on display. He keeps it locked away in a secure room, and occasionally brings it out for the curious or the foolish. Whether the painting is truly cursed or simply a creation too disturbing for the human mind to hold, one thing is certain: once you've seen it, you cannot forget it. At first glance, she looks harmless, a vintage Raggedy Ann doll. Her yarn hair faded, her smile stitched wide with childlike innocence. But behind the cotton exterior of Annabelle lies one of the most unsettling cases of supernatural possession ever recorded. To this day, her name alone evokes unease, not because of Hollywood's exaggerations, but because of the real story, documented by two of the most respected paranormal investigators in modern history, Ed and Lorraine Warren. They believed Annabelle wasn't haunted by a ghost at all, but something much darker, something that pretended to be innocent, something that wanted to stay close. The doll never walked, it never spoke, but it moved. It shifted, it showed up in places where it shouldn't have been, and wherever it went, tragedy followed. How does a child's toy become a vessel for something inhuman? And more importantly, why does Annabelle remain locked in a glass case to this very day, with a sign that reads, "Do not touch. Positively do not open"? The story of Annabelle begins in 1970, in Hartford, Connecticut, when a nursing student named Donna received the doll as a birthday gift from her mother. At the time, it was just a thoughtful gesturea, quirky addition to her apartment, shared with her roommate, Angie. The doll was placed on the sofa, then on the bed, like any decoration might be. But within days, they began to notice movement. At first, it was subtle. Annabelle would be found in a different position, her arms crossed or legs shifted. Then she started appearing in rooms she hadn't been left in on, sitting on the floor outside a locked bedroom door. Notes began to show up, written in childlike scrawl on parchment neither of them owned. They read only two words: "Help us." And, disturbed, the girls contacted a psychic medium who claimed the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins had attached itself to the doll. The story went that Annabelle had died on the property and simply wanted love a home. Moved by sympathy, Donna agreed to let the spirit stay. It was a mistake, because whatever was inside that doll was never a child, and it didn't want love. It wanted control. The atmosphere in Donna's apartment quickly deteriorated. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Whispering echoed through the halls without a source. One night, Ludana's friend and frequent visitor awoke to the feeling of being watched. As he turned his head, paralyzed by dread, he saw Annabelle sitting at the foot of his bed. In an instant, the room turned ice cold. He couldn't move, he couldn't scream, and in that silence, he watched as the doll slowly climbed up his chest. Then everything went black. The next morning, Lou awoke with 3 deep scratches across his torso, fresh and bleeding. There was no one else in the room, no signs of forced entry, only the doll, lying face down on the floor. That was when Donna and Angie contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens, upon examining the case, concluded that a demonic entity had been manipulating the doll as a conduit to deception to earn trust before infestation. The Warrens performed an emergency blessing and took Annabelle back to their occult museum for containment. But even in transit, the doll caused near-fatal incidents. The car's brakes failed multiple times until the Warrens doused the doll in holy water. Once displayed in their museum, Annabelle was locked inside a glass case. Visitors were warned never to mock her, never to tap the glass. One man did, and hours later, he died in a motorcycle crash. His girlfriend survived, but would never speak of what he said just before the impact. Annabelle is not what most people expect. Unlike the porcelain-faced doll popularized in films, the real Annabelle is soft-bodied cloth limbs, yarn hair, painted on smile, a classic Raggedy Ann, faded from time and wear. Her appearance is disarmingly innocent, almost laughable to those unfamiliar with the story. But that's precisely what makes her more disturbing. She does not look dangerous, and yet, she is treated with the same caution one might reserve for a bomb. Encased behind thick glass in the Warrens' now shuttered occult museum, Annabelle sits upright on a wooden pedestal. A crucifix hangs above her, a Bible rests beneath. On the case is a handwritten sign, "Warning, positively do not open." Paranormal researchers describe the doll not as haunted, but as manipulated. In other words, the entity that uses Annabelle is not bound to her, but channels through Hera Puppet for darker intentions. Objects nearby are said to vibrate slightly. EMF meters spike erratically, and those who stare into her button eyes too long report headaches, dizziness, or an overwhelming desire to look away. The doll has remained sealed for decades. No new incidents have been officially reported, but caretakers still bless the case regularly, and no one, no matter how skeptical, has ever tried to open it. Because with Annabelle, the fear isn't in what she's done. It's in the unshakable feeling that she's still waiting to do more. To this day, the case of Annabelle divides belief. Skeptics point to suggestion, imagination, and the power of fear. They argue that a cloth doll cannot harm anyone, that what happened to Donna, Lou, and others was psychosomatic, coincidence wrapped in folklore. But the consistency of the reports, the timing of the events, and the patterns that emerged across different people, locations, and years suggests something more than mass hysteria. Demonologists, including the Warrens, were certain the doll was not possessed by a human spirit. Rather, it was a Tula lure crafted by something inhuman, something patient. The deception was calculated. Present innocence, earn trust, then infiltrate. This model appears across other cases involving cursed objects, but few have garnered the same level of attention or fear as Annabelle. Psychics who have stood in her presence claim the energy she emits is watchful, but dormant-like, something coiled beneath water, still, yet aware. Religious authorities who've blessed the doll caution against even touching the glass, and former museum staff have quietly admitted they avoided the doll's room entirely when working alone. Whether the stories are embellished or entirely true, Annabelle remains a cautionary figure, not just of the dangers of the occult, but of the risks we take when we underestimate what we don't understand. Because if a doll can think, and watch, and wait, what exactly is it waiting for? They say death leaves a mark, but sometimes it leaves a place. In a quiet English inn, nestled among the hills of North Yorkshire, there sits a chair. It's unremarkable to look at. Wooden, worn, smooth by time, with a curved back and legs just slightly uneven. Yet no one sits in it. No one dares. Not anymore. Locals call it Busby Stoop. And for generations, they've warned each other to keep away, because legend holds that anyone who sits in the chair, no matter how healthy, how young, how bold, will die shortly after. Sudden, unnatural, often violent. The curse is so feared that the chair has been chained to a wall and raised off the ground, unreachable. But that wasn't always the case. Before it was locked away, the chair had already claimed lives dozens, by some accounts. And the man said to have cursed it? He was a murderer, hanged beneath the very beam where the chair once sat. What happened in that room so long ago? And why does the death toll continue to grow centuries after Busby drew his last breath? The legend traces back to the late 1600s in the rural town of Thirsk, North Yorkshire. It was a place of stone cottages, muddy roads, and taverns dimly lit by candlelight. Among them stood a modest inn, now known as the Busby Stoop Inn, named not for its charm, but for its infamy. Thomas Busby was a local drunkard, unpredictable and violent. He lived with his wife and her father, Daniel Aughty, a man of means and strict temper. The two clashed constantly, but one argument crossed the line. One evening, Busby returned home to find Aughty seated in his favorite chair. What followed was brief and brutal. A struggle, a murder, and a body buried near a quiet roadside. Busby was caught, tried, and sentenced to hang. On the day of his execution, as he was dragged past the inn, legend says he let out a final curse. Let death come to anyone who sits in my chair. No one took him seriously. Not at first, but over the next 300 years, strange deaths began to collect around the chair like dust. It remained inside the inn, where soldiers, laborers, and locals sat in Itofen, joking only, to meet sudden and violent ends days later. The village stopped laughing. The pattern began slowly, but once noticed, it couldn't be ignored. During World War II, the inn became a popular stop for Royal Air Force pilots stationed nearby. They drank, told stories, and dared one another to sit in Busby's chair. According to records kept by the innkeeper at the time, those who sat in it never returned from their missions. Eventually, the locals noticed the pattern and begged the inn to remove the chair. But it remained. In the 1970s, a delivery man jokingly dropped into the inn for lunch. He sat in the chair without thinking, brushing off warnings. That afternoon, he crashed his truck into a tree and died instantly. A roofer who sat in it while waiting for a takeaway fell through a roof the same evening. A cleaning woman who once bumped it by accident suffered a fatal aneurysm within hours. There were dozens of similar cases recorded in local news, whispered through generations, each story different in circumstance, yet identical in cause. Eventually, the inn's owner had enough. He contacted the Thirsk Museum and asked them to take the chair, but only under one condition. It was never to touch the ground again. The museum complied. The chair now hangs on the wall, bolted high above eye level. Since then, no one has dared to sit in it. But the curse, they say, never left. It is an ordinary chair. No carvings, no symbols. Just aged oak, time-worn and stained with centuries of use. The seat curves inward slightly, shaped by the weight of those who once sat without fear. Its legs are uneven, as if one corner sank more deeply into the earth than the others. The backrest is tall, arching just enough to suggest a throne, but not of comfort, of permanence. Historians believe the chair dates back to the early 18th century, consistent with the time of Busby's execution. Some experts question whether the original chair could have survived so long, but those who've touched it, moved it, studied it, guarded it, speak of an unease, a coldness that lingers long after contact. The innkeepers who kept it through generations eventually refused to sit in it themselves. Even hardened skeptics avoided it instinctively, without knowing why. It is not a grand object. Not beautiful, not rare, but somehow it commands space. When it sat in the corner of the Busby Stoop Inn, patrons would avoid its reach without realizing. Those who forgot, who drank too much, who laughed too loud sat down casually. Some of them never got up again. Today, the chair remains bolted high on a museum wall, unreachable and untouched. And while some argue the deaths are mere coincidence, Few have volunteered to test the theory, because if the stories are wrong, you've only embarrassed yourself. But if they're right, the chair is still waiting. Theories around the chair's curse vary wildly, divided between folklore, psychology, and something instinctive. Skeptics believe it's nothing more than local superstition magnified by coincidence, a series of unrelated deaths loosely connected by memory and myth. They argue that confirmation bias drives the legend people only remember the tragedies and ignore the hundreds who sat and lived. Yet those who've studied the case firsthand disagree. Paranormal researchers point out that many of the deaths occurred shortly after the person sat in the chair too quickly, too frequently to ignore. Some speculate that Thomas Busby, in his final moments, left behind not just a curse, but his rage. That in a flash of hatred, his spirit bound itself to the object where he'd once ruled, watched, and finally lost everything. Others suggest that over centuries, belief itself has become the true cursesso, many fearing the chair, feeding its legend. That fear became form. The museum, for its part, refuses to allow access. Staff have been instructed never to move it. And to this day, no one has asked to sit in it again. Not seriously. Perhaps it's all a myth, fueled by stories passed down in dimly lit pubs. Perhaps the chair is just a chair. But if that's true, why has no one, in over 40 years, dared to try? It remains where it hangs, still, empty, and waiting for someone foolish or unlucky enough to take a seat. In 1922, the world watched as a forgotten king was pulled from the sands of time. Tutankhamun, pharaoh of Egypt, dead before adulthood, lost to history for over 3,000 years lay, undisturbed in his golden tomb, until British archaeologist Howard Carter cracked the seal. What followed wasn't just a milestone in archaeology, it was a descent into fear. Soon after the tomb was opened, the people connected to it began to die. Not just one or two, dozens. Sudden illnesses, infections with no source, accidents too precise to dismiss. Lord Carnarvon, who financed the expedition, died from a mosquito bite gone septic just months after entering the tomb. His dog howled and dropped dead the same moment, miles away. Newspapers called it the curse of the pharaoh. Scientists called it superstition, but as the body count rose, even the skeptical began to whisper, had they violated something sacred? Was Tutankhamun's soul reaching back from beyond the veil? Or had something been sealed inside the tomb never meant to see the light again? More than a century has passed. The bodies are buried. The artifacts locked in museums. But one question still lingers like sand in the wind. Was it a coincidence or a warning? The Valley of the Kings lies buried in silent limestone cliffs scorched by desert sun, where wind carries dust like whispers across the ruins of empire. For centuries, looters and scholars had combed its tombs, believing all the great pharaohs had already been uncovered. By the early 20th century, Egyptology had grown quiet, its golden age assumed to be over. But Howard Carter didn't believe that. Backed by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon, he searched tirelessly for a name long dismissed as unimportant. Tutankhamun, a boy king whose reign was short, mysterious, and almost erased from the records. For years, Carter dug with no reward until November 1922, when a set of stone steps was found beneath a layer of rubble. The tomb was untouched, sealed since antiquity, and within it lay treasures beyond imagination: statues, jewelry, golden chariots, and, at the heart of it all, a solid gold sarcophagus holding the mummy of the forgotten king. Carter had unearthed the only nearly intact royal burial site ever discovered in Egypt. But as the seal was broken and the tomb disturbed, a strange quiet fell over those involved. Egyptian workers muttered warnings. The air inside the tomb was stale and cold, as though the dead were still breathing beneath the gilded walls. Then, the deaths began. The first to die was Lord Carnarvon. Just months after witnessing the tomb's opening, he suffered a mosquito bite to the cheek. The wound became infected. He developed blood poisoning, then pneumonia. At 2 a.m. on the 5th of April, 1923, he died in Cairo. At that same moment, the lights in the city reportedly went out. Back at his home in England, his dog let out a long, chilling howl and collapsed, dead. That might have been dismissed as coincidence, but then more followed. George J. Gould, a wealthy financier who visited the tomb, developed a fever immediately afterward and died within days. Arthur Mace, one of Carter's excavation team, grew weak and died from arsenic poisoning. Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, went blind and died from blood poisoning shortly after inheriting his brother's estate. In all, at least a dozen people with direct or indirect links to the tomb died under strange or rapid circumstances within the decade. Reports emerged of artifacts being mailed back anonymously to Egypt, their senders claiming misfortune, illness, or haunting. Workers refused to enter the inner chambers without prayers. Some were found sleeping far from the excavation sites, too frightened to explain why. Even Howard Carter, who lived for years after the discovery, was said to have suffered intense paranoia. He never publicly admitted belief in a curse, but he never dismissed it either. Whatever was unleashed in that moment dust, superstition, or something deeper left behind more than gold. It left behind fear. Tutankhamun's tomb was unlike anything ever seen nearly intact after over 3,000 years, sealed behind stone and time. Its walls were covered in vivid paintings, spells from the Book of the Dead meant to guide the pharaoh into the afterlife. Inside were more than 5,000 artifacts: ivory daggers, golden shrines, perfume jars, chariots, even food sealed in clay. At its center stood the sarcophagus, a nested set of coffins, each more elaborate than the last, until finally, the boy king's mummy lay encased in solid gold, crowned and cross-armed. But it wasn't just the wealth that unsettled observers. It was the silence, the stillness, the sense that something had been perfectly preserved, not just objects, but atmosphere. Air from a forgotten era pressed in on the living. There were reports of a Warningan inscription allegedly etched near the tomb's threshold. "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's rest." Egyptologists later denied the inscription existed, but the story had already taken root. Many of the artifacts were shipped out scattered across museums in London and Cairo. Some were never officially catalogued. Whispers began about objects behaving strangely, lights dimming near them, staff falling ill, odd electrical disturbances in climate-controlled vaults. These weren't dramatic hauntings, but small, relentless patterns, enough to make curators wary. To this day, the golden mask of Tutankhamun's face, serene and ageless, draws millions. But those who stand before it often describe a strange sensation. Reverence, yes, but also weight, like being watched, like trespassing. Perhaps the curse is not in the tomb, perhaps it is in the memory. Scientists, faced with public fear, were quick to offer rational explanations. They pointed to mold and bacteria microorganisms sealed inside the tomb for millennia, capable of causing respiratory infections or septic reactions once disturbed. Some suggested ancient spores on the walls or toxins embedded in textiles. Logical, yes, but unsatisfying. Because while a few deaths could be explained, not all could. Not the timing, not the precision, not the sheer concentration of misfortune circling around those who entered the tomb. Others see the curse as psychological, a case of suggestion, where belief itself becomes the danger. The more a person fears a curse, the more likely they are to fall ill, make mistakes, invite accidents. This theory is seductive because it puts the power in our hands. But it also requires us to believe that everything, every sudden death, every vanishing illness was imagined. Then there are the occult interpretations, that the ancient Egyptians, masters of death and ritual, encoded their tombs with more than traps and spells, that the energy of burial rites, when broken, can ripple outward like a disturbed current. Some even believe that curses are not supernatural at all, but mechanisms of balance, awakened when the sacred is violated. Howard Carter died peacefully in 1939. Many take that as proof the curse never existed. But others point out he never entered the burial chamber, only observed it through the breach. Tutankhamun was buried to be forgotten. But now, his name is one of the most famous in the world. His body lies in glass, dissected by eyes across centuries. If there is a curse, perhaps this is it. Some things are meant to stay buried. 5 objects. 5 stories whispered through generations, each soaked in dread and consequence. A box that holds silence like breath. A painting that screams without a voice. A doll sewn from innocence and inhabited by something else. A chair that waits for its next mistake. And a tomb that never wanted to be seen again. Some say these are just stories fabrications crafted by fear, coincidence given costume. Others are not so certain, because whether cursed or not, each object shares something deeper than folklore. They change the people who encounter them. They linger in thought, in memory, in dreams. Perhaps the danger isn't the object itself, but what it awakens in us. So, the next time you pass an old chair, or see a dusty doll behind glass, or find yourself staring too long into a stranger's painting, ask yourself, are you looking at it, or is it looking at you? And above all, be careful what you touch. Some things were never meant to be held.